I just want to thank you. Here we are on chapter 11. We started our journey together to get ready to celebrate Robert's 100th anniversary, his 100th birthday. We started this on 3/11. No, that's when the book was published. We published Robert's book on 3/11/2003. Most of all, They Taught Me Happiness came out much later, but Prophet the Hatmaker's Son, we published it on Robert's 80th birthday. And just think, now we are going into his 100th birthday, 3/11/2023. We started this journey with Canadian Senator Douglas Roach. And you know Douglas Roach, the marvelous senator from Canada who said, war does not work. And he spent so many years at the United Nations. So as we go through these chapters, we each had a speaker. And we always remembered what Robert said, to dream always of a peaceful, warless, disarmed world. And now as we plan for his birthday, 3/11/2023, Ambassador Chadre always says, Mrs. Muller, let's do this. Mrs. Muller, I'm going to get the University for Peace to work with us. And he did. This celebration on 3/11/23, which is a Saturday, is going to come from the University for Peace that he co-created with Rodrigo Carasso. Robert was Assistant Secretary General at that point. He was up on the 37th floor listening to the General Assembly. And Rodrigo Carasso, the president of Costa Rica, came in and said, I'd like to give you some property in Costa Rica, and I'd like to have the first University for Peace. Would you be open for that? Robert got so excited because he remembered Outan's saying, until we have a University for Peace, or an education for peace, we're not going to have peace on the planet. So he ran down, and when Rodrigo Carasso came out of the General Assembly, he hugged him and said, I'll help you. And that was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. And I look at you, and I know so many of you are lifelong friends, as I am with you, and I thank you. So when you go to peacepodcast.org, in case you missed one of the previous sessions, just click on any of those in the Peace Community Book Club, and the Peace Book Club will be right there for you. You know, it's very interesting as you look around and you see the people who have been the faithful people on this Peace Book Club. Joyce Wyckoff, who does the magazine, Sandy Hinden, who does the invitations, and the Visioneers from Canada. And so now we are at this point when this is the last chapter, but it's not the end. It's just the last chapter because we're going to go forward. Jim Halderman wrote me an email 5 minutes ago. What's the next book? We have to keep this going. And so I showed him, most of all, They Taught Me Happiness, which is a possibility. This is the book my son republished for Robert because he felt that if we were happy, as Robert always said, we could solve our problems, even in the most desperate situations. So that's enough about me, about what I know about Robert. This chapter 11, isn't it interesting to read chapter 11 and to realize, I was reading it to Bettina, who's our speaker today, that how much respect Robert had for the people in the United States. He said, I have great admiration for Americans and how they have rolled across France and Belgium and fought their way to Berlin to defeat the Nazis. They insisted on including human rights in the UN Charter. Then created the Marshall Plan to pull Europe back on its feet. Truman stood up to Stalin over Berlin when the Soviets blocked every route into the city. But that didn't stop the American and the British planes. I'm reading from page 239. We're airlifting food and supplies over Soviet-controlled territory to Berlin, 24 hours a day at a rate of one plane load every 3.5 minutes. Is that not something we should pay attention to right now? This book is so relevant now. The tremendous strength and courage and the generosity of the American people. I open this book, and every time I open it, It's exactly what I need to read right now. Maybe you have found that out too. As you open Prophet, all of a sudden you say, well, that's exactly what I need to read right now. So with that, I welcome you. I am Mrs. Muller, as Ambassador Chaudry always says. I love it when I keep calling me, hello, Mrs. Muller. I have some ideas for you. And I pay attention because he's at the United Nations. He's at the top of the world. And I do exactly what he said. And there's something else about him. He reminds me of Robert. And I'll never forget Barbara Marx Hubbard at a meeting I was with in Santa Barbara at La Casa de Maria. And she said, if Robert Muller tells you to do something, you better do it because it's going to happen anyway. So why don't you just be the responsible person and do it? So I started talking to Eleanor Roosevelt in Costa Rica, who was our dear, dear friend at the University for Peace, and she's still living there. And she said, Robert would say things that made you feel you were part of something bigger than your ordinary life. That what you were doing is helping to create the world we all want. And also, he gave you a sense of belonging, that you belong to something bigger. Think about that. This is what our Peace Book Club is doing, allowing us to see together how what we can be a part of something even bigger. And so that's why I'm so happy to introduce Bettina Gray. Lifelong friend. Robert introduced me to her. She drove us to the 50th anniversary of the United Nations. She lives near Berkeley, but let me tell you why she's so famous. Bettina Gray, Emmy Nominated podcast host, composer and musician, creator of the Parliament of Souls, with In Search of Global Spirituality. She interviewed 28 spiritual leaders, including Robert Muller from around the world. In the Parliament of Souls, the PBS television series, she was nominated for an Emmy. And then she went on to produce The Creative Mind, The PBS television series. And these are on her YouTube channel if you want to watch some of them. And then Toward a Better Understanding, the executive producer of a weekly radio show, interviews developing people and the audience is listening. Religion, spirituality, nonviolence, and last but not least, this is why I'm so excited, finding our future. Finding our future. She will lead us today through this. Let me just read two of the testimonies from a long list, let me tell you. It's a passion. This well-articulated and wonderful woman has a residence seldom seen on TV talk shows for interviews like The Creative Mind on PBS. She's immediately knowledgeable and articulate, determined, sharp-eyed, sharp-mouthed. Sharp-mouthed, is that you, Bettina? And creative, productive, as if she's by magic able to get the best out of these people. An engaging and warm conversationalist. Ms. Gray is able to provide compelling interviews which leave the audience with a sense of direct engagement. That's Bettina Gray. Bettina Gray, I thank you for joining us today. I am just happy as can be, beyond happy to have you here for Chapter 11. And so let's have Bettina bring herself into the gallery and let her be our speaker today. Welcome, Bettina.
Thank you, Barbara. Now I have to live up to it.
No problem for you.
I don't know. I'm pretty free range.
All right. You just be free flowing and welcome.
Well, it's actually an honor to be around in conversation with this group. I've sort of quietly listened in the last few of the book clubs and realized I was in an astute gathering of people doing a lot of very interesting things, and I only got a small trickle of the information. We're going to remedy that a little bit today. What I have in mind for you, so keep this in the back of your mind, is we're going to do breakout rooms so that you can have some direct conversations with the people here. It'll be small, 3 to 5 people. but give you some time to explore ideas together. And my reason for doing that is my thesis, actually, for most of my life, is we are each other's treasures. This is really how we learn. If you think back on anything that you learned in any deep way, it was from somebody else that had a passion or an interest and could convey that. So when we do the breakout rooms, and you can start thinking about this now, there are two questions. One is, Robert Muller was a treasure. What did you take from that encounter, either in person or from his book, from these books, or through other friends? So I would like you to share how that life affected yours. And the second question is, he was a prophet in the 20th century. We have lived in an age where we straddle both centuries and are looking forward. How do we become, or how do we encourage prophets for the 21st century? Where are we going and how do we build it? That kind of discussion. So those are the two topics when you get to breakout rooms that I'd like you to keep in mind. And following that general outline, my comments, so you get them ahead, you get a preview, are what did I get from my encounter with Robert, as I prefer to call him being French-German, that he was stubbornly hopeful. And it's actually that quality of stubbornness, even in a jail, incarcerated, even when the Gestapo were coming for him, even when all the naysayers said internationalism, meh, it's a fool's errand to do something like the UN or the Declaration of Human Rights. He forged ahead because he believed in it. And it was a situation, I can imagine him saying, so what do I have as a choice? I believe in this, I have to work on it. And he lived that, also with a good deal of good cheer. Barbara, you don't have to contradict me. What my public impression is, here's a man who would take out a harmonica in a full... We were at, suddenly my mind is skipping, the Fairmont, trying to talk about the building of interfaith cooperation. This was in the late 90s. And it's a room full of suits, women's suits, men's suits, but suits, at a very prestigious setting. And what does Robert do but pull out a harmonica out of his suit pocket and play Beethoven on the harmonica? And that is Robert in a nutshell, stubbornly hopeful. The Ode to Joy. But I have another word that comes to mind for that attitude, and it might strike you as odd. I think of it as guerrilla transformation. And what does guerrilla mean? Usually it's associated with guerrilla warfare, meaning it goes entirely outside of the establishment and expectations and finds unique and creative ways to communicate an idea. And if I were to characterize the 21st century, what we need is guerrilla transformation. But isn't that what being a prophet is? Prophets bring us ideas, truths that we might not have thought, and often find very unusual ways to convey those ideas. And they certainly, in the history of prophets, have had institutions and governments not happy in trying to enclose and diminish those communications. And you see time and again, I mean, Jesus did it. Gandhi did it. End runs entirely right around the attempt to hold on and control the current mental real estate. It just cuts right through. And that's what we're challenged for in being prophets of peace in the 21st century, is finding new ways. And I would say, mainly because I've been a communicator all my life, so I think of it as a very important topic, that the characteristic of a prophet is that they are excellent communicators. Robert was an excellent communicator. What is an excellent communicator? Fundamentally, they make us pay attention to the subject instead of themselves. They really convey the ideas in a simple, clear, easy to get, not self-conscious way. And I think part of doing that is understanding the tools. We are at an astonishing moment in human history because our tools for communicating with each other are unprecedented. They're absolutely novel. We can gather here today and talk to each other with a group of people we choose to talk to from all over the world instantaneously. That just has never happened in the history of humanity. And it's done without government permission, most cases. So these tools, I mean, Robert embodied this. Correct me because I may have the details. This is what I remember of the story, that he was young, he had been captured, he was thrown in jail, as I remember the telling, in a cell where it was standing room only, impossible circumstances. So what did he do? He grabbed a stub of a pencil out of his pocket and started writing a love poem on the wall. That is a communicator at heart. In all kinds of limited circumstances, he still was communicating and still was doing an end run. He was using guerrilla tactics because he understood the tools. If only a pencil stub, then use a pencil stub. And many of us, I'm speaking to a certain generation here, are phobic about the new tools that are around. The young generation has embraced them wholeheartedly, mostly, not all. I've actually had to tutor a few young generation folks, which I love dearly, in the new techniques. But by and large, if you want to know something, ask a kid when it comes to using the new communication tools. So Robert Muller, as stubbornly hopeful, was an excellent communicator, and he understood the tools of his day. The development of the UN was one of the tools of his day. We now face such a different climate. In my own vision of what's going on, there's quite a lot of throwback going on, a retreat from internationalism, in some ways an increasing polarization. Brian Farr and I have talked long hours on how do we deal with polarization, fragmentation. And again, communication is my answer. But why communication? Because the 21st century is really going to be built or fall apart around relationship. It is relationship that endures. Without relationship, governments, communities, families can wobble, can fall apart. How do you build relationship? Listening, which is a tool of communication. So Robert, the stubbornly hopeful communicator, acted on his ideas. He was always writing letters and making phone calls and going ahead. Not, oh, will they listen to me? Or I've never spoken to this person before. Just taking a dream and a thread and pulling on it I think, Barbara, you could back this up. He wrote letters, emails, all day long, every day. Phone calls. I don't know. Is that right?
Yes. In fact, I have a letter here from Robert that wrote to David Krieger, who founded the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation.
Yeah.
If he found that somebody who was on any wavelength to create peace, he would nurture it with his letters, his voice, and his phone calls.
Well, there are two things that strike me as where we're going in the 21st century. One is communications, and you could put a parenthesis around that with the word relationship. And the other is from chapter 11, the creation of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. Because Robert said about that in chapter 11, the world will change because we have come to a new understanding of what it means to be human. It's really a profound change. Eleanor Roosevelt said, this declaration may well become the international Magna Carta of all people everywhere. Try to think back to a time when the news media didn't talk about human rights. Because even if there are voices against it, it is a topic of conversation now. It exists. It's in the global dialogue. So we have a new image of humanity and we have new tools to use. The old part of it is communicating the ideas, the will to do it, and knowing what ideas you want to communicate. And how radical is that? A new vision of humanity and a new way to relate and connect. What a wealth. But the real wealth is our people all around the world and the ability to connect with each other. That's my belief of where peace is built. It's why I did the interview series, is that I did. So, communications and relationship in radical new ways. Now, I'm going to show you a clip of the interview with Robert. We will then sort of give you some technical how-tos about the breakout room and proceed. I'm sharing screen, the interview. I'm hoping the volume is loud enough for you to hear it. Let me make sure we've got us all set up.
There you go.
Got it?
Got it.
Okay.
You've spent 40 years with the UN, and yet you remain a hopeful man.
Well, I would say that it is the United Nations that has made me hopeful. Because when I entered the UN in 1948, I just came out of the Second World War. I saw incredible horrors. I was imprisoned by the Gestapo at the age of 17. I was in the French underground later on. I saw people killed. I saw Germans and French acting towards each other like animals. And I really could not understand it. As a matter of fact, when I was a little boy, I thought that life was divine. I used the adjective divine because it was the biggest word I could find. I was happy to be alive. I was happy to look at nature, to look at the moon, to look at the stars. Really, my basic inclination was to be grateful for life as a little boy. And people said, look, what a strange little boy who goes around saying that life is divine. I said it in German because we had a German language there, göttlich. And then later on, I saw that there was a border, which you were not supposed to go on the other side because there were Germans. I saw troops come in 1939, Africans. I saw a big wall being built, the Maginot Line. We then were evacuated twice from our hometown. Just within 2 hours, get out of the town, become a refugee. And then came the whole ordeal of the war. And all this was absolutely contrary to my love for life and my ideal for life. So when I came out back home, and I was one of the only young boys who was not killed in my neighborhood, my father asked, what do you want to do with your life?
And that didn't kill your own hope, your own spirit?
No, I decided that I will try to prevent this for my children. That I'm not going to accept these horrors and I'm going to do something against it. When I came back, I discovered that my father had been a year in prison, which I did not know. And he didn't know that I was in the French underground. So he asked me, what are you going to do with your life? I said, oh, it's very simple. I'm going to work for peace. He said, you're crazy. There's no peace profession. We're poor hat makers. You will never make it. I said, well, I don't know how I'm going to make it, but I'm going to devote my entire life to peace because I do not want to see what I have seen at the age of 17 or 18.
And you have...
And I have. 2 years later, I was in the United Nations.
You've watched us go as a planet through so much, through so many crises. And many people feel that we as a species are doomed, that we have written our own death warrant with the amount of environmental pollution, the war, the hate, the violence. You don't think so?
Oh no, I'm of totally opposed views.
Why?
For a very simple reason, is because there is evolution, and in this evolution, humanity is learning. For example, I was sure that we would have another world war within 20 years. If the French and the Germans couldn't do it, how would the Russians, the Chinese, the Africans, 5,000 religions, different races, they will never do it. And as a young man at the UN, I gave us 20 years before we had a world war. We haven't had one in 50 years. I was told that the UN would be closed in 10 years. It's still here. It's universal. We were told that decolonization would take 100 to 150 years. We did it in 40 years. My view is that humanity is learning, but it is like in the kindergarten. We are little children. We have never done it before. We were never in charge of managing the entire planet.
We've never done it before.
We've never done it before. That's the first time that
What have we never done before?
To manage the whole planet in peace and in justice and in happiness for all. We've never done it. They have done it in a little nation here. They have conquered the others. But to have the whole planet as our whole, as our home, and as a human species to evolve to the point where we become the peaceful, orderly managers, there we are still very little children. And the only way we learn is by accident. Like children, you have to burn your fingers. In the United Nations, any great progress we have made was always the result of accidents. You tell them what the future will be, they don't listen. But then they burn their fingers, the people die in the movie houses in London, you have the Torrey Canyon thing, then they run to the UN. What are you doing about what we didn't even call the environment at that time?
We haven't even thought of ourselves as a whole or as a world during the time that you've been at the UN. You've seen just a rise in our thinking as a collective.
Well, perhaps the public doesn't see that because the public is not well informed. But I'm living it on a daily basis. And I see the progress which is being made. I see, for example, the heads of state beginning to meet. They didn't even want to talk to each other at the beginning. I saw Gorbachev and Reagan meet at the suggestion of the United Nations. I saw more than 100 heads of state in Rio de Janeiro to deal with the environment. For years I've been preaching that the heads of state should be to the Security Council. They were there last year. So that there is a progress. Again, the heads of states are global illiterates because in school they're not being taught about the world. But you have to, in my opinion, the human species is going to win. We are going to have a completely different millennium because what I see today as progress, I would have never believed it as a young man.
Here's a concrete example. This morning, as I...
That already segued into another show, so that's why we stopped there.
Bettina, that's amazing, that video. You know, it's so hopeful. You chose the right part of your interview with Robert because it really crystallized his thinking. Thank you so much.
It also showed his stubbornness.
Stubborn. He wasn't going to give up. Never,
That's right.
ever. Right.
So the technicality of this is Zoom can do breakout rooms. How many of you have been in a Zoom breakout room? Okay, so it isn't entirely unfamiliar. the way we do the Zoom breakout rooms is Barbara's disappeared from the screen, I think, to technically get this set up. Where are you, Barbara? Did you
Right here. I put us on gallery view.
Okay, great. So she's going to help, and maybe if you need help, Barbara, I can as well.
Why don't you put us into breakout rooms, if you don't mind?
Well, let's see. How many people have we here? We're going to do it randomly.
It looks like there's a couple who are not showing their face. So I would say we have 22 people.
So 4 in a room?
18 to 20 people, yeah.
Yeah, Barbara, it says 17.
You see 17. Oh, okay, that's 17. There you go. It's at the bottom.
Okay, so let's do 4 breakout rooms.
Sure, that'd be great.
All right.
Okay, those of you who have not done breakout rooms, you will see a little box come up and it will say join. That means you just join and then you're in a breakout room.
And be careful when you leave to leave the breakout room, they'll give you
Yeah.
There are 2 choices, and one of them you'll end up leaving the whole meeting, and the other you'll end up leaving the breakout room. So you have to be careful when you leave. We will give you a heads up about the timing. I'm thinking about 20 to 30 minutes to discuss, and then we're going to come back in the hole and have a bit of a report back, or see if the ideas for the 21st century, what we've come up with.
Okay, let's repeat the questions. How do we become, what did you get out of Robert Muller's vision and life? And second, how do we become prophets in the 21st century?
Okay, so you're going to see a choice on your screen in a moment. Asks if you want to join the breakout room, and then it'll look just like this, but there'll only be 4 people. Ready? Here we go.
So far, we haven't gotten our session yet.
It takes a moment.
Okay. Looks like people are going in.
Yeah.
We're left. We're the 2 of us are left.
You and I get to wonder.
Okay.
But I'm not sure if you have the screen that allows you to. Do you see how?
Oh, I just see 4 boxes. I guess the breakout rooms are going.
Yeah, they are. And you, as host, can choose to join anyone on any one of the rooms on the list.
So would I click on the 4 boxes down below?
Yeah.
Okay.
Click join.
Oh, yeah. Bettina, you're one. Dennis Wong, Diane, Helen. Oh, this is a good group. Oh, boy. I don't want to interrupt.
I'm going to the room 4 because there's only 3 people in it.
Okay.
So I'll see you back in a bit.
Okay, I'll just go
send
in.
a reminder. Okay.
And when I go and join a group and then I leave.
You'll come back to this main room.
No problem.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
See you in a bit.
Great job.
When we can be in that presence of such a big spirit, it does something to our own cells and souls. And so I'm sad I didn't ever get to meet him, but I'm grateful I have a really nice friendship with Barbara. And so I would say what I've gotten from him is really the key word is inspiration. Just wanting myself to be bigger and just do my part in the peace journey.
Inspiring. Julie?
So I'm the same. Tammy, I didn't meet Robert, and I met Barbara through Sandy Hinden. And so they're both online friends. I haven't met either of them. But we meet every week and talk about mutually assured survival. So bringing peace together with, action on climate change. And besides everything that you folks have spoken about, like he's rather luminous, right? And And I've never been sort of in the orbit before of a group of people carrying on somebody's legacy like this, right? You know what I mean? Like, that's what we're doing, really, is carrying on Robert's legacy. So thank you, Barbara, for that. My greatest lesson or gift that I've received from Robert, because I work in climate change, and my husband is founder of the Climate Emergency Institute. And I mean, I know more than I want to know about where we're at with climate change. And people talk about Robert's optimism, which I don't share. But the lesson that I have received from him is this idea that whatever challenge we face, we can see it as you know, like as a way to experience something new. Like he was always curious about how he could solve the next challenge that he faced. And so that's, you know, instead of being sort of all down about the climate emergency, what I've learned is, hey, you know, this is just another new challenge. We can be excited about this, even if, you know, the laws of physics mean that it's too late or whatever. We can still rise to the challenge. And that was his gift to me.
I'll make a couple of comments. I also didn't know him personally, but knew of him and knew of his reputation, and know him some through Barbara, who's been a friend as we've worked together in the Rotarian Action Group for Peace. But a book that was inspirational to me in life was McCullough's John Adams.
I think we lost you, Brian.
And part of it has a lot of
Okay.
Am I back?
Better.
I'm back. Anyway, so in the John Adams McCullough book, late in the book, I was reading a statement from John where he said that nobody else could have done what he did, and I thought, boy, that's pretty heady. and then his next statement was, because God made me stubborn when I know I'm right. And I think great leaders, Robert just Robert kind of underscores that. Another example of when you're right, stick in there and do it. And his incredible hopefulness that can be the optimism that Julie talks about. There's something uplifting about just engaging in the battle when you know you're right, hanging in there and not letting other things discourage you, and do whatever you can do to help make things better. So he's an inspiration in so many ways. And I was grateful to see that clip today. I hadn't seen that before. Barbara, do you have a comment?
Well, I just was enthusiastic about meeting Robert, because when he was invited to the invitational from Costa Rica, where he was living, he replied, "I will accept this invitation with enthusiasm." And that word, enthusiasm, I said, well, that's who I am. I accept whatever comes my way with enthusiasm. Even when I was working in a dime store, I was the most enthusiastic popcorn popper they ever had. Because of my enthusiasm, I got hired back. And so I said, when I read his with enthusiasm, I got chills. A man in this lofty position saying, I will attend with enthusiasm. And so when I met him, he wasn't at all what I expected. He just was this mesomorph. Tall, I was. Short, he was. Built, he was. And yet we fell in love. It was that magnetism that he brought to me that I felt I could do anything. That's what I got from Robert. I felt I could do anything. And I've been on that path ever since I met him in 1994. I could do anything, and that's what he gave me. And so that's my gift from him. And I hope the gift that you all got from him as we read these also. It's just like, and then he would play the harmonica, which opened up the hearts of the audiences as he was enthusiastically telling them the 10 things they should do tomorrow. 10 things, never make a speech without giving them 10 reasons to go home and do something. or maybe 20, depending upon the audience. So that's it for me. Thank you for asking, Brian. Are we doing the next question? How can we be prophets in the 21st century? I'm
Yeah,
having.
we could do that.
Did you do that already?
No.
Well, and I can start. So I had a question. How can, well, the kids, we have 400 people now in our human rights affinity group, and most of them are young people. And I was wondering what we can inspire them to do, because they're ready to take action. But I was thinking that video is really good, and maybe we need to show that at our human rights affinity group meeting. And I think I don't know about everybody else, but what I can do is just continue with the education of young people, teens, and people in their 20s, rather than the children that I worked with before, and encourage them to find the solutions. And I have found one solution, and that's the Alternatives to Violence Project. And so I think maybe we could encourage people in this group to join the Human Rights Affinity Group if they're members of the UNA USA. And maybe I can encourage people of the Human Rights Affinity Group to do the Alternatives to Violence Project and become facilitators. And so we can teach people not to fight, but to listen to each other. That's my goal.
I'll go next. So I think the question was straddling the two centuries, and what I would share is I'm a harpist, and I feel like music is one of those bridges between the two centuries. And I also think that it's a bridge for generations. It's a bridge for the divisiveness. And with our communication now that Bettina did such a beautiful job explaining, we have possibility of literally being around the globe in little squares, just like we are right now on our Zoom, and sharing those peaceful moments, whether it's within, the different organizations that we belong to, whether it's with the United Nations. I think we have that possibility now. And so I really see that as part of my own role to amplify that and expand it. And feel very, very honored and blessed to be in community to do that.
Are we following the same order as last time, Julie?
Sure, might as well. Well, Nancy, you said something, I think, in your first go round that had me picturing, do you remember the first Earth Day in the United States? And there were like 1 million students who were out, there were teach-ins all over the country. And I actually teach that to my students today. I'm teaching them the history of sustainable development. And I what I pictured was, because it's so hard to fit things, I'm also an educator, and it's so hard to fit things into the curriculum, just because it's bursting, it's so full. But what might work is to have like a mutually assured survival day, or just a peace day, or just to create like a peace day sort of package, and encourage schools, like pick a day this year and have a peace day, and find a peace hero, find a climate change hero or a mutually assured survival hero in your town, and invite them and have the kids talk about stuff and do some art, do some music, and because I think teachers would give a day, to something like that. Like a school staff could say, yeah, we can afford a day because it's going to be educational. And then it's over. Like they can't sort of picture adding in something that's going to go on and on and on. That's the idea that came from something Nancy said. I have things up my sleeve that I want to do, I want to accomplish. Like I haven't created my legacy yet. And that's something that, reading all these books by Robert and about Robert and hanging out here on Sundays. And that's what I'm emboldened to do, I think, enthusiastically, is to, just to be brave about it. Like he was fearless, he seemed right. Am I right?
Yeah. And he wasn't exactly the you just don't, when he walked in a room, you say, oh, who's that guy? He didn't have that, but when he opened his mouth, you, as Bettina said, you forgot.
Yeah.
And he became one.
Inspiration.
There is something, Julie, there are 3 projects that I still try to do with kids or anybody who will. One is the Global Art Project for Peace. And that's an every other year where children or older people or teens can do a project alone or together. And then you sign up, and I could tell you it's out of Arizona, and then you get a partner, and they try to match the partners. And so then you send first you display your project someplace. It could be on an office wall or downtown in a store or any place. And then you send it off to your partner, and they send theirs off to you. And if the whole school does it, then you have an exhibit of your art, and then you send that off, and then you have an exhibit of the art that came back. And that's a lot of fun. There's another one, which is Global Peace, I think, Global Peace Pals. And that's with the peace poles out of Japan. And they trade artworks. They send artworks off. It's not quite the same. And then there are the Crane Project for Peace. And they make cranes and get a partner and send their cranes off. And so it's cranes going back and forth.
There's also, isn't it September 21st kind of deemed the Day of International Peace?
Yeah.
And that was founded 40 plus years ago by the United Nations and Pathways to Peace. So that's, it feels like that would be a natural day to plug in as a day of peace for the children.
And Santa Barbara always does that.
Right on. We better fit Brian in here. Oh, sorry.
Brian. We're talking too much.
On the topic about how we encourage prophets of the 21st century, one of the things, I think we live in a time of sensory overload. There's so much information coming at us. And because of that, I think it's important. Our motto, I've been working with the Rotarian Action Group for Peace, but one of the things we focus on is a motto: simplify, unify, engage. And I think to get the message through, you really have to simplify, and you have to speak simple statements of truth that resonate with people. And I think that's a role of a prophet, and I think it applies to all of us. I used to be on the Norman and Barbara Tanner Nonviolent Human Rights Advocacy Board at the University of Utah. And one of the things that I thought from that is, and I noticed this in that last chapter of Robert's book, he was talking about how the United Nations Universal Declaration came together, and how it was kind of some from everybody. So they, the Russians had a piece they put in there, and they just talked about all the different folks that put pieces in there. And one of the things that's interesting to me is when my daughter was ill, being treated for cancer, I was taking her 3-year-old boy somewhere. He was being a difficult child for her and making life more challenging. And I said, Jack, you think it's easy to be a mother or hard? And he said, oh, hard, so hard to be a mom. And I said, and that's why we should cooperate and try to help him. And he said, but I want to do what I want to do. And I started thinking, and that probably in a nutshell is the problem of humanity. And so when I put that into the human rights context, I think anybody who wants to do something uses that word, they have a right to do it. I think as they do that, in some ways it cheapens the discussion of human rights. And when I was on that board, one of the things that I thought that goes along with this idea of simplify is I thought it'd be really cool to have a human right, an Article 1 human rights group that just focused on Article 1, because there are some things in there. I mean, there's some articles that everybody agrees. There are others that people say, well, I don't know, that's a right. It's a good idea. It's something we got to work toward, but I'm not sure I would call it a right. And then you get to the end, you get to areas where there's disagreement about whether this is even a good idea. And so I think you dilute it a lot. And Article 1 says something about we're all created equal and with equal endowment of rights and human dignity. I can't remember the words. And it says that we should act towards each other in a spirit of brotherhood. And if you could get people doing just that one thing, a lot of those other rights would just take care of them. So I think part of Prophets of the 21st Century is just to simplify the message, speak simple statements of truth. And then I have a friend that has a theory that I call percolation theory. And
Percolation?
Percolation.
Oh, percolation. That was purple.
And he's a believer in the divine, as am I. And he said whenever there's something big, really big that's going to happen, he thinks that God prepares lots of different people in lots of different places to do their piece. And then we bring everybody together. And whether you believe in the divine or not, I think there's truth. I think there's wisdom in that. There's lots of good people in lots of different places that seem to be moving forward, and then as we come together, that's when we make the really significant difference. In closing of this comment, I think of a comment that.
And we lost you again, Brian.
There's something in all of us that seeks after. Bishop Tutu said, "There's something in all of us that seeks after the good and the true, and recognizes it when we see it." And I think those simple statements of truth help us do that. And as we do our part, we kind of come together. And as we come together, we're able to do something more significant.
Well, going back to prophet, how did we become prophets? The thing that Robert always did was he never thought he couldn't. He would just do if the Secretary General said, we're never going to make it if we don't have a spiritual voice at the UN. That was Utan. Well, Robert didn't say, well, what are we going to do? He said, well, the Pope's a member, the Vatican's a member of the United Nations, so we can invite the Pope. Well, so he did. He invited the Pope, and the Pope came. And then when the Pope left, he said, thank you so much for bringing all my cardinals, and et cetera, et cetera. And Robert then said to him, well, the Pope said, what can I give you for making this possible? And he said, well, just give me a small little crucifix because I'm a Catholic. And so the Pope took off his cross and put it around Robert's neck. And Robert, from that day forward, wore that cross. And a little story, he had to go to the emergency room and everybody there thought he was the Pope. And I would say, he's not the Pope, he's just a sick Catholic. But it's these little stories of Robert. And then when my intern got the recording from when the Pope came to the UN, and what does it say? Never again war. And so Robert never accepted that maybe things couldn't work out. He just did it. If he read in the paper about some president doing something, he wrote them a letter and told them what they could do. It was, and he did it. Everything was instantaneous. He didn't sit around and write a note, I'm going to do that tomorrow. No, it was, I did it. I did it.
Yeah.
And he did it. Right, Nancy? Nancy.
Yeah, he would actually really like the kids today and the way they take action right away.
Mm.
In that group, I noticed when I have a young co-chair or when there are young people working with us, when we say, all right, let's plan, and they're typing it or they're doing it as we're talking.
Yeah.
And so they've
And
got
that's
the plan by
exciting,
the time
isn't it? That's so exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
Yeah. Yeah.
It doesn't leave a lot of room for what we kind of bring to the table, which is wisdom, which they probably see as, just procrastinating, right? But yeah.
And time to process everything.
And that was Robert, I think. Yeah. Let's go out there and
So Barbara, I have a question for you. When Robert was, like writing his letters or making his phone calls, whatever, did he write to everybody and anybody, or did he pick his battles? Like, did he ever know, okay, that one's never going to work. Like, that guy's never going to budge, so I'm not going to waste my time? Or would he talk to or write a letter to everybody, anybody?
He had no judgment. He just felt it had to happen. And he would write letters to children who wrote him a letter. Anybody that wrote him a letter got a reply. Anybody who did anything he thought needed to be done, he gave them alternatives to what they were doing. Mm. He never judged first. First, he just said, I better write this letter. And he would. Yeah. And it was, those days, we didn't have computer cut and paste. Yeah. We had typewriters, and he would type with only 2 fingers. He didn't even know how to type, but he would type with 2 fingers like a madman. And then he'd make a mistake. He'd get the white it out, and type it again. And you should see all these letters I have with white out. But he never, that's a very good question. He never thought about it other than this emerging wisdom would erode, and he would write. It would just come up. And he would just write. And I remember one who Tom said this, and then he did that, and he had an amazing recall. Mm. And he would say, you might want to consider this. And that's why Barbara Marx Hubbard said, if Robert tells you to do something, you might as well do it. Yeah. He gives you that energy to complete that task. She was the one that, and when he met, when there were several people who were running for office, right? Running for president of the United States or something. He would say, well, when you get there, do this. When you get there, do this. He didn't say, well, I'm only at the United Nations, I'm nobody. He would say, when you get there, do this. Right. And he would just give people this go.
Yeah. And the reason I ask is that when, like the 2 prime ministers before, the one we have now, I used to write to him all the time. And I would put it in big, fat black ink, and I would fax it, because then I'd know that someone was seeing it, And then we had a really, really right-wing, scary prime minister for 10 years. And I found myself cowering. Like I stopped writing to him. And I have had letter to Vlad on my to-do list for months, Vladimir Putin. And I realized, like, it's time to write, and like from one human being to another. Like, he is still a human being, somewhere in there. That man has a heart. It's buried it deep.
Just do it. Robert would, if he wanted to write to Putin, he would do it. And if Robert were alive today, you know what he'd be doing? He'd be sitting on Putin's front porch until he starved to death. He would get a ticket and go to Putin and just sit there and say, you got to listen to me. The world needs you to be a big man right now. Yeah. Just do it, Julie. Yeah. And it's a different world now, a little bit more scary. But one of the things that Ted Turner always told Robert, because they were close friends, he said, quit writing me such long letters. I don't have time to read them. Just give me a short message. What do you want me to do? That's Ted Turner. And he would write, okay, I'll try to write short letters. But he would write long letters, a whole page on the typewriter, single space.
Yeah.
And then Turner, and Robert said, "Why don't you ever answer?" "Well, I can't read all that, you know. I'm too busy."
That's what Brian was saying about simplify, I think.
Yes. Yeah. True enough.
Keep it really clear and simple. And
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm finding these breakout rooms to be very powerful. Are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
always.
Yeah, I don't know when we're going to go back to the big group, but we're almost out of time, so I'm going to bring everybody back if I can do it. I'm new to this.
So, Barbara, before you do that, I just want to say, I think in one of these sessions, it would be really interesting for you to talk about what it was like to be married to Robert. I just am really fascinated. And I know I texted you at one point and said, when Doug Gillies was interviewing Robert, where were you? Did you overhear all these conversations? And you said, "Oh yeah, I was making tea and crumpets," and they were in the next. I just think that would be really fascinating for you.
I found some pictures, Tammy, going on with that. I found photographs because we just now unleashed maybe 500 boxes of Robert's archives from a storage bin, and they're all here now. And I open up these treasures, and inside was these pictures of when they were doing the book. And, maybe I could do that on the first Sunday of March before his anniversary.
Yeah.
I could do that on that. I was going to start with everybody talking, but we did that today. But maybe I should say what it was like to be married to Robert and just start sharing my stories.
Yeah.
And then because
maybe you could share your pictures too.
Yeah, I could do that. It would be thank you, Tammy. I could do that. That would be fun. Being married to him. And then at the end, when he had Alzheimer's, he would stand up to do these speeches, and then all of a sudden he just went blank. And I said, "Oh, are you lucky to be here today? Because he's getting a download from the universe." And he was always getting downloads from the universe. At night, we'd be sleeping and he'd go with his tongue. I said, "He's getting a download." He would get these downloads from the universe. And I'd say, "Oh, please just let him live till morning." And, he was downloading what the universe was giving him. And then the next morning, I didn't even talk to him because he just started writing. He'd write 20 ideas in the morning, and he never read what he wrote.
Wow.
He just kept going. It was like, why read what I wrote? I already wrote that. So he would keep, and we have 7,500 ideas, maybe 500 are mine. But those 7,000 ideas are all original. And he would write them. I would take them to the secretary. She would type them up. He'd edit them, and that was it.
I just thought of something that I could do, talking about that second question. So those ideas, what if I went through those ideas, and this is sort of for mutually assured survival. What if I went through those ideas and I if there are any that need to be updated, right? And weave the climate emergency stuff into it and then start popping them out there on social media.
That's a great idea. And we have robertmuller.org. If you ever want to read his golden sayings, we're trying to come up with 100 for this 100th anniversary from the University for Peace in Costa Rica. And I sent first 90 to Ambassador Chaudhry. He said, "I want humanitarian, United Nations, and peace. I want those magic ideas." But if you go to robertmuller.org, you'll see this picture. You're in this picture. You'll see this picture, and then all his ideas are there, and they're indexed. There's just, I don't know how one man at 88 who died at 88 could do that. So finishing my story. So he's standing up there, and he doesn't know what to say next because he's got a bit of Alzheimer's, And I said, "Okay, now he's getting a download. So Robert, you sit there and you get your download, and I'll finish your talk." Because I knew what he was going to say. I had been with him for 17 years, and I just finished the talk. And then when I was done with the talk, he'd stand up and play his harmonica. That was the end of that. But you have to be on your toes because you never know. Instead of saying, "Oh, it's just so sad he's got Alzheimer's." No. I wrote a column called The Caregiver's Corner, and all the advice I give to people about always smile. They don't know what's going on anyway. Just keep smiling. They think it's all perfect. Oh, wow. And then I would say things like, sometimes the best thing you can do is nothing. Just sit there and hold their hand. And I mean, these I got into an organic magazine. These columns were so valuable to people who are now going through this. And here he was at the top of the world, and now here he was, forgot what he ate for breakfast. So I take a picture with my camera and show him, oh, look at, you already ate breakfast. Now you can go outside and go for a walk. But you just have to be so creative. And anyway,
And
did that
enthusiastic.
answer your question?
Yeah.
And enthusiastic, Barbara, like you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
That helps a lot.
You're welcome. Okay, now I'm not sure where. Brian, did you want to say anything else? You're going to get to talk when we go back in this group. I think I'm going to try to bring everybody back.
So we're gabbing. You go ahead, Brian.
I think everybody's having too much fun to come back.
It's been delightful to be with you all. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful.
And don't go anywhere now. I'm just closing all rooms. Closing all rooms. There we did. Now close.
Like being on a spaceship.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got 60 seconds. So
Leave breakout
Bye.
rooms. Hi, Bettina.
Hi there. You and I were doing just the same thing. I was just about to send a notice to the breakout room people.
I went to the session with this group right here.
Yeah.
Brian Farr, your dear friend, and then Julie and Nancy and Tammy. We had such a good time, let me tell you. Did your group do too? You're a genius to do this.
Well, it's a good thing to do. It's part of my advocating new technologies.
Do you want to lead the discussion now, Bettina, about what they got in their breakout rooms?
Yeah, we have about 15 minutes.
Right.
I want to share that video. I want to be able to see that video again. That was wonderful.
Nancy?
I will put a link to it in the chat.
Yeah, I was going to say it's on her YouTube channel. What is your YouTube channel called?
My overall channel, which is mostly clips from a lot of different shows and people, is called Creative Films Media. Let me put some links in
the chat. Great. Well, how did it go, everyone? Did you have fun? Isn't it amazing that these breakouts? I just had such a good time. Anyway, Bettina's going to lead us through a discussion. So did we have 4 breakouts? So
could you go ahead and do that? I'm going to go get the links and do some other things. Could you?
I just came out.
Sure, I'll do that. Who was in group number 1? Raise your hand if you're in group number 1. Do you remember? Okay, I know where I was. Brian Farr, give us a report on what we did in our group. Let's start with Brian.
You didn't warn me about this. I didn't take notes.
You don't have to. What was the consensus? Did we have a consensus in there?
We had a consensus that Robert was wonderful and inspirational. We were grateful to have his life touch ours. And that was our big consensus. Julie, Tammy's gone. Julie, you have anything to add?
No, I mean, that's kind of what it is. We did talk a little bit about what we're inspired to do and to carry on doing. I mean, there's one thing I wanted to say that I didn't mention. I'm going to say it quickly. Do you folks know what darshan is? You know, when you have a guru in the Indian tradition and the guru looks upon you, gazes upon you, right? And that is kind of what it feels like, you know, that without ever calling himself a guru, that it's like we're all receiving darshan through this process. It's really nice.
What does that mean?
Nice.
Yeah, so it's I just remember it in Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and in the ashram they would stand above, like they would stand up on the balcony and just look down. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes the darshan, once Sri Aurobindo and the mother died, they would play a movie, you know, of those gurus, and it was like you're just in their presence. You're basking in their presence.
Thank you, Julie. Anybody else in that group want to say anything?
I have a question. That was Robert's influence, but what did you have to say about going forward, being in the 21st century?
Well, we actually all sort of had our own little project that has been inspired. So,
Right.
But what about the challenges? I mean, things like we talked about artificial intelligence and the impact of virtual reality, and all kinds of things that we're going to have to meet, and intergenerational communications.
For me, I said this year and last year, I'm co-chair of the Human Rights Affinity Group, the UNA USA Human Rights Affinity Group. And we have 400 members, which might not seem like a lot, but they're all young. And I think we need to inspire and educate them to solve problems. And there's another thing that I do, which is Alternatives to Violence Project. And they're doing it all over the world. And it's when two groups have been fighting or disagreeing, like Palestinians and Israelis, Russians and Ukrainians, South Sudanese and Sudanese, they come together and they sit in a room and they listen to each other and they do these activities. So I think listening and working together, and that's why I wanted that video to share with some of our members of our Human Rights Affinity Group. So I think inspiring the people in their teens and 20s is to take action, because they will take action.
Thank you. And anybody else, any other group would like to say something?
I shared that there was a period when I met Robert where he was pretty discouraged, and when he was older, and I often feel that discouragement when I try to launch new projects and they fall flat, like lead balloons. But I realized that from that, from what Desmond and Jerry were talking about, is that to focus, it's like yin and yang. There's sadness and discouragement, and the other side is accomplishments and enthusiasm. So they're kind of opposites of the whole, and that they weave together, and that at the beginning of projects, which I'm a good starter of projects, and as Robert said, they often are ignored at the beginning, and they are maybe appreciated later on. But I just started a project for Haiti to try to get people to focus on helping Haiti, and it's fallen flat again. And I realized, well, that's the process, and just keep continuing. And it's like, in very much ways, I feel like I am Haiti, in that I'm ignored. They're ignored. So I'm kind of taking it on as the challenge to bust through that being ignored, just as Bettina was talking about, find ways to do end runs, break through the establishment, going around the establishment, the hell with the establishment, and just keep going,
That's a very good point, because in our group, what I realized is Robert never stayed forever with anything. Like if he was taking on Haiti, he'd write 2 letters, then he'd go to the next thing. And if he was working with Bush or whoever was president, he'd go on to the next thing. So that way he didn't have to feel sad that it didn't work. He just kept doing it. He just kept saying, I'm going to write another letter. Or if it was the Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, he just kept going. So in your group, Sandy, you also had Judith Harris, and you had Desmond, and you had Dennis and Jerry. Anybody in that group have an additional comment to Sandy? Jerry?
I just wanted to say, in response to what Sandy was saying about Robert being discouraged, of course he was, we all are. But I think that what he was saying is that we need to focus on the progress that we're making. And what I like Bettina's comment on guerrilla warfare. Thought that was terrific, and a terrific example of what Robert was all about. And because of that, look at all the accomplishments he made. So, so I was just saying that that's what we're doing. We're focusing on the progress.
And in our group, Tammy asked me, well, how did Robert do so much? And I said, he just kept going. He just kept going. He just kept doing things to make it, if it was important, he did it. Okay, let's go to Joyce Wyckoff's group. Anybody in there want to bring in anything? In Joyce's group, we had David Wick, Bettina, and Sala.
Well, I would just like to share that one of the things that really struck me is, again, from the interview that Bettina had, was when Robert said, it's really around consciousness, and that we're evolving, we're growing from kindergarten, humanity in kindergarten, evolving to the next stage, and that's critical to know. So, what are the things that we can help our consciousness evolve and becoming more aware? One of the things that I had mentioned was, people having more and more our own practices, our meditation, our different practices to help us become more self-aware, more conscious, because we know what we know, but there's a whole lot more to know. So that's one part of our evolution.
And the other part too, he never ever assumed that they wouldn't be receptive to his ideas. That's a very important concept. He never assumed anybody would say, oh, that's a bunch of crap. He just said, this is an energy I'm sending with my words. And he kept saying that he never judged anything. He just kept saying, this is an idea you should implement. And he was judgment-free. He was just judgment-free. And I don't know, that's a very hard thing to get rid of our conditioning. And his conditioning was, I can take action. So he forgot to be conditioned. He just took the action. Helen Peacock's group had Diane, Jim Halderman, and Joanne DeFore. Anybody from that group like to report? Helen,
they're all the other three had to go. We talked a lot about the evolution of human consciousness and the shift that has to happen. We talked about how 200 years ago, we all thought slavery was okay. And now we think it was abhorrent. And we would like to see, what we're working for is a shift in consciousness where everybody would be appalled at the very idea of using war as a means of resolving conflict. It would be considered primitive, and we came up with the example of, I don't know whether this was true in the States, but in Canada, everybody used to smoke. Everybody used to smoke. And then we passed, Julie's nodding her head, and then we passed a series of laws that said you couldn't smoke at work, you couldn't smoke in enclosed places, you couldn't smoke in parks, you couldn't smoke where there would be children within a mile radius. Like, we passed this series of laws, and consciousness shifted, and we think smoking is abhorrent now. We wouldn't, and that just happened in our lifetime. So that was just a sort of a small example of what we were talking about. We were talking about communication and the fact that we're of a certain age, and so don't have the same ease of access to some of the communication tools that are out there right now. You were talking about reaching the younger generation and so on. And I had a conversation last week with an old friend. I haven't talked to him in 40 years. He spent his entire career with the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corp. He knows more in his little finger about various ways and means of communicating in an impactful way to reach a larger audience. He put me onto a bunch of 30-second, he had a word for them. Powerful. I don't remember his word. And in 30 seconds, you got like advertising, only for good. And I'm thinking we need to not just connect with the younger generation, but partner with people from the younger generation who have those skills, because we can be way more impactful.
Thank you. Yeah. Bettina, I'm going back to you because our time is almost up.
Yes. So I wanted to finish my segment with a poem that I dearly love and actually set to music it toured in Costa Rica, which I loved the idea that it did. This is the poem. Let me get to where that is. Oh dear, I hope I haven't lost it. Here it is. This is by William Stafford, and I'll read it for you. It's only these two stanzas. It's titled At the Unnational Monument Along the Canadian Border. This is the field where the battle did not happen, where the unknown soldier did not die. This is the field where grass joined hands, where no monument stands and the only heroic thing is the sky. Birds fly here without any sound, unfolding their wings across the open. No people killed or were killed on this ground, hallowed by neglect, and an air so tame that people celebrate it by forgetting its name.
Wow.
Wow.
Isn't that a beautiful poem?
This is a field where the unknown soldier did not have to die. And you know, it is so powerful, Bettina, today that you have changed the consciousness of 17 people for life. Once we've been exposed, you can't go back. And we've been exposed to the possibilities of us becoming the prophets that we're looking for. I'll never forget.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes, carry on.
And
everybody here, I can tell, already are.
Yes, we are the people we've been waiting for. and I kept, in our little group, we did bring up, well, did Robert stop and say, well, they're not going to like this? No, he never even gave it a thought. He just kept going. He didn't waste his time thinking what somebody else was thinking. He only knew what he thought. He was very self-centered. That was important, to be self-centered, because he didn't have time to be anything else. But in his self-centeredness, he was always thinking of, this is the one word, one paragraph, one sentence that came out of this book, Prophet. When he was telling his mother and father and his sister, I'm going to the United Nations, I'm going to work for peace, and I'm leaving. And his mother said, okay, this is the other family I want you to work for, the human family. You only work for two families, this family and the human family. Robert worked for the human family in his self-centered way. He did not wait for somebody else to write his letters. He had no computers, although he did have one and then he couldn't stand it. He went back to the typewriter. He wanted to be on the typewriter because it was real, it was tactile. He could hear it, tacka, 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 and he could use whiteout. So if I were to give you one message from Robert, it's don't judge it, just do it. And with that, I thank Bettina. I thank all of you. Give me a thumbs up if you like the breakout rooms. Let me see how many liked them. Great. Thumbs down if you didn't. And then go home. No, just kidding. I tell you, that breakout room that I went to, I was so glad I went because it was so powerful to hear what people were saying. Well, okay, something came up in our group and they asked me if I would do a session on what it was like to be married to Robert. Well, we have this empty session called March 5th, I think it is, whatever the first Sunday is in March. So I think I might do that, what it was like to be married to Robert, which would be before the 11th of March, which would be when we're doing the big 100th anniversary celebration. But I could just be there and you could ask me questions and I could just tell you what it was like, because it was a roller coaster. It wasn't oh, look at now, I'm married to Robert Muller, life is smooth. No, it was a roller coaster. People would call him and then he would say, I'm so sad I'm not eating dinner. Oh, come on, eat dinner. And, and then he would go in the bedroom and he'd write 14 ideas. And so it was like, okay, somebody asked me, what were you doing when he was working on this book with Douglas? Well, I was making snacks and iced tea and everything to keep them motivated to work for 2 hours. And I didn't say anything. I didn't go. And I found some pictures in these 400 boxes I have in my garage and in my patio of Robert. And he was just so dedicated to listening to Douglas and telling Douglas what happened. And I have these pictures. He's doing this. He's always thinking. And so I thought, maybe I'll do that. So anybody have a thought to end our day today? That's all besides me. Thank Bettina. You really do deserve those praises that they said about you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bettina. Thank you, Barbara.
Thanks, but I'd like to know why the book was stopped at that point in his life. Why did they choose to stop it there? I'd wonder what Douglas would say about that. And then
because Douglas didn't have any more time. It took him 2 years to write Prophet. And then he said, and I'm not making any money on it. Yeah. And I just don't get any cash. And that's what Robert's father told Robert. Don't be a peacemaker. You're going to die poor. Well, he didn't die poor, but he didn't make the money. And Douglas said, I can't keep refinancing my house to write the next episode. And so that's why he stopped it. You'd be surprised how many people said, oh, don't stop. I'll give you $1,000. Don't stop. We want to hear the rest of the story. Well, the rest of the story is in his 7,500 ideas. And the rest of the story is in the archives that will eventually get to the United Nations. If I were to just pull together all of the letters that Robert wrote, I'd have 18 boxes full, because he didn't go back and correct them except with whiteout. He just kept writing. And again, he didn't wait to see if it was going to work, except with Ted Turner. He'd say, well, Ted Turner, why don't you ever answer me? And again, Ted Turner said, because you write too many long letters. I just want short letters. Quit writing such long letters. Look at that. There you are, Sandy.
I don't have volume 1. I need volume 1.
I have volume. Yeah. These people, I have one last thing to say. Go ahead. Go ahead, Bettina.
No, I was just about to scoot. Sorry. I'll wait and see what you're...
The last little thing came from Roger Himovitz. And he wrote to Robert, and this is in 2002 when Robert was writing these ideas. What a treasure trove. I am so excited to have these wonderful books that Sandy was holding up and all those tapes you gave me. I watched the video about the Invitational and was so enthralled. I knew of the significance and power of the Invitationals, but had no contact on how they began, no context. Thank you both for sharing this very important stuff with me. They will become an important part of my library, and home delivery on top. You brought them to me. Thanks again. And I am excited and looking forward to our next meeting. I am assuming that you will be there. With love, Roger Himovitz. That's just a very short letter from somebody who has all of Robert's books.
Oh, Barbara, when did he write that?
2002.
I got to go.
10/19/2002, Roger Himovitz.
Yeah, I know Roger.
Okay, everybody, let's say goodbye. Bless you. Peace be with you.